This video is going to be a little bit different than my other videos. So far, I've been talking about how you can raise your vibration and take in more energy from the universe and use your key and all that stuff. But this is going to be a little bit different because there are also other applications of this phenomenon that you can use in different ways in your life, like precognition, for example, is what I'm going to be talking about today. And the thing about precognition is, and I've given this a lot of thought, it's very it's at first when you look at it, it's like something that just happens to people, right? Who are on a certain level of thinking, like you're an enlightened person and you're on a different level of thinking and you start like predicting the future, for example, and stuff like that. The thing about precognition, and I've given it a lot of thought, is I've broken it down into two factors as to why some people are able to predict the future and some people aren't. And what it basically comes down to is this. The first major key to acquiring precognition is mathematics. And I know that sounds funny, but if you think about it, when mathematicians use math, they're predicting an outcome before it ever happens. So if you get really good at doing your math, you're getting really good at predicting things, right? Like 2 + 2 = 4. I'll give you an example in real life. This person did this, causality, right? This person did this. They said, well, you look fat in those jeans. So the other person is going to say, maybe I do look fat in these jeans. Maybe I should take them off. That's the basics of how precognition works. So you really, if you want to become a precog, you really want to get your mathematics abilities up. And the way that you do that is, it's kind of weird. This is how I train mine without even like knowing that I was training it. You want to do your math without paper or a calculator. Now, what do I mean by that? Why is that so important? You're training your mind to remember things, to remember at an accelerated rate. When I was in school, I used to always do my math in my head. And even though you're not going to get good grades doing that because everybody's going to think you're cheating, it really pays off in the end that you've done the math in your head, because you're training your memory to remember things at a greater rate, to remember the outcomes, the perceived outcomes at a greater rate. So imagine you're training yourself to be a calculator. That's the first step of precognition, right? That's the first step of precognition. Now, the second step is a little bit more abstract, but I really believe that this is part of the reason that I became so good at being able to predict the future, like seconds ahead of myself, you know? Or like hours ahead of myself, or years ahead of myself. Like, I become really good at predicting the future. And these are the two things that I attribute it to. The second thing that I attribute my ability to predict the future is I studied literature. Now, why is literature so important? Literature is so important because when you study somebody's work and like break it down into all these different factors and stuff, what you're really studying is the human mind. You're studying how different people think about different things. Like, there's this idea in psychology that when you read somebody else's story, you're actually like going into their mind and studying how their mind works. So the more of these stories that you consume, and the more of these stories you begin to understand how they're different, how their different thinking patterns work. And like let's use an example. Let's use Naruto. I watched so much Naruto and I watched so much One Piece that eventually I began to be able to calculate. And this is after my math training, mind you. So you want to do the math training before you do the abstract training of the literature. You become so able to predict what a next chapter is going to be, what the content of the next chapter, that eventually you start doing that in real life, right? You start being able to predict what other people are going to do in real life. It's just a matter of different people think different ways. If you know them well enough, that you're going to get on their frequency, or whatever you want to call it. I think frequency is the right word, because people, now this is going to blow your mind, right? People all vibrate at different frequencies depending on their emotional resignation, their emotional, I should call it a key signature for simplicity. Everybody has this certain key signature where they have these certain emotions that are going through them, and because they have these certain emotions that are going through them, they vibrate at different frequencies. And if you can understand how someone thinks at these different frequencies, you're basically understanding how their mind works. And if you can understand how their mind works, you can understand what they're going to do next. And if you can understand what they're going to do next, you can understand things like if they're a writer, what they're going to write next, or if they're your like parent, what they're going to say next. So you want to do the math training first to train your memory is the biggest thing, but you're teaching yourself to learn how different equations equal different things at different times, and how different outcomes can happen based off of these different factors. That's just how math works. It's how they basically predict the future. They predict what's gonna happen next based off of these numbers, right? But you can also train yourself. If you have the mental capacity to understand other people's minds, you can train yourself to predict their next actions. That's the scientific explanation behind it. So that's how you train yourself to be a precog, and that's also how you train yourself. Well, I'll get into that in another video. But for now, peace.